Treasure Island, Part 4, The Stockade. Chapter 16. Narrative continued by the Doctor, How the Ship was Abandoned. It was about 1:30, 3 bells in the sea phrase, that 2 boats were rent ashore from the Hispaniola. The captain, the squire, and I were talking matters over in the cabin. Had there been a breath of wind, we should have fallen on the 6 mutineers who were left aboard with us, slipping our cable and away to sea. But the wind was wanting, and to complete our helplessness, down came Hunter with news that Jim Hawkins had slipped into a boat and was gone ashore with the rest. It never occurred us to doubt Hawkins, but we were alarmed for his safety. With the men in the temper that they were, it seemed an even chance if we should see the lad again. We ran on deck. The pitch was bubbling in the seams. The nasty stench of the place turned me sick. If ever a man spelt fever and dysentery, it was that abominable anchorage. The 6 scoundrels were sitting grumbling under a sail in the forecastle. Ashore we could see the gigs made fast and man sitting in each, hard by where the river runs in. One of them was whistling Lilliburlero. Waiting was a strain, and it was decided that Hunter and I should go ashore with the jolly boat in quest of information. The gigs had leaned into their right, but Hunter and I pulled straight in the direction of the stockade upon the chart. The 2 who were left guarding their little boat seemed in a bustle at our appearance. Lilliburlero stopped off, and I could see the pair discussing what they ought to do. Had they gone and told Silver, he might have turned out differently. But they had their orders, I suppose, and decided to sit quietly where they were and hark back again to Lilliburlero. There was a slight bend in the coast, and I steered so as to put it between us. Even before we landed, we had thus lost sight of the gigs. I jumped out and came as near as running as I durst, with a big silk handkerchief under my hat for coolness' sake, and a brace of pistols primed for safety. I had not gone 100 yards when I reached the stockade. This was how it was. A spring of clear water arose almost in the top of a knoll. Well, on the knoll and enclosing the spring, they had clapped a stout log house fitted to hold 2 score of people on a pinch, and a loophole for musketry on either side. All round this they had cleared a wide space, and the thing was completed by a paling 6 feet high, without door or opening, too strong to pull down without time and labor to open up to shelter the besiegers. The people in the log house had them in every way. They stood quite quiet in shelter and shot the others like partridges. All they wanted was a good watch and food. For short of a complete surprise, they might have held the place against a regiment. What particularly took my fancy was the spring. For though we had a good enough place of it in the cabin of the Hispaniola, with plenty of arms and ammunition and things to eat and excellent wines, there was one thing overlooked. We had no water. I was thinking this over when there came ringing over the island the cry of a man at the point of death. I was not new to violent death. I have served His Royal Highness the Duke of Cumberland, and got a wound myself at Fontenoy, but I know my pulse went dot and carry one. Jim Hawkins is gone, was my first thought. It was something to have been an old soldier, but more still to have been a doctor. There is no time to dilly-dally in our work, and so now I made up my mind instantly, and with no time lost, returned to the shore and jumped on board the jolly boat. By good fortune, Hunter pulled a good oar. We made the water fly, and soon the boat was alongside, and I aboard the schooner. I found them all shaken, as was natural. The squire was sitting down as white as a sheet, thinking of the harm he had led us to, the good soul. And one of the 6 forecastle hands was a little better. "There's a man," says Captain Smollett, nodding toward him, "new to this work. He came nigh hand fainting, Doctor, when he heard the cry. Another touch of that rudder and the man would join us." I told my plan to the captain, and between us we settled on the details of its accomplishment. We put old Redruth in the gallery between the cabin and the forecastle, with 3 or 4 loaded muskets and a mattress for protection. Hunter brought the boat round under the stern port, and Joyce and I set to work loading her with powder, tins, muskets, bags of biscuits, kegs of pork, a cask of cognac, and my invaluable medicine chest. In the meantime, the squire and the captain stayed on deck, and the latter hailed the coxswain, who was the principal man aboard. "Mr. Hands," he said, "there's 2 of us with a brace of pistols each. If any one of you 6 makes a signal of any description, that man's dead." They were a good deal taken aback. After a little consultation, one and all tumbled down the fore companion, thinking no doubt to take us from the rear. But when they saw Red Ruth waiting for them in the sparred galley, they went about the ship at once, and a head popped out again on deck. "Down, dog!" cries the captain, and the head popped back again, and we heard him no more, for that time, of these 6 very faint-hearted seamen. By this time, tumbling things in as they came, we had the jolly boat loaded with as much as we dared. Joyce and I got out through the storm port, and we made for shore again as fast as oars could take us. The second trip fairly aroused the watchers on shore. Little Bolero was dropped again, and just before we lost sight of them behind the little point, one of them whipped ashore and disappeared. I had half a mind to change my plan and destroy their boats, but I feared that Silver and the others might be close at hand, and might all very well be lost by trying for too much. We had soon touched land in the same place as before, and set to make provision in the blockhouse. All 3 made the first journey heavily laden, and tossed our stores over the palisade. Then, leaving Joyce to guard them, one man to be sure, but with 6 muskets, Hunter and I returned to the jolly boat, and loaded ourselves once more, so that we proceeded without pausing to take breath till the whole cargo was bestowed. When the 2 servants took up their positions in the blockhouse, I, with all my power, sculled back to the Hispaniola. That we should have risked a second boatload seems more daring than it really was. They had the advantage of numbers, of course, but we had the advantage of arms. Not one of the men ashore had a musket, and before they could get within range for pistol shooting, we flattered ourselves we should be able to give a good account of 6 at least. The squire was waiting for me at the stern window, with all his faintness gone from him. He caught the painter and made it fast, and we fell to loading the boat for our very lives. Pork, powder, and biscuit was the cargo. It was only a musket and a cutlass apiece for the squire and me and Red Ruth and the captain. The rest of the arms and powder we dropped overboard in 2 fathoms and a half of water, so that we could see the bright steel shining far below us in the sun on the clean sandy bottom. By this time the tide was beginning to ebb, and the ship was swinging round on her anchor. Voices were heard faintly hallooing in the direction of the 2 gigs, and although this reassured for us Joyce and Hunter, who were well to the eastward, it warned our party to be off. Red Ruth retreated from his place in the galley and dropped into the boat, which we brought round the ship's counter to be handier for Captain Smollett. "Now, men," he said, "do you hear me?" There was no answer from the forecastle. "It's you, Abraham Gray. It's to you I'm speaking." Still no reply. "Gray," resumed Smollett a little louder, "I am leaving this ship. I order you to follow your captain. I know you're a good man at the bottom, and I dare say not one of the lot of you's as bad as he makes out. I've had my watch here in my hand. I give you 30 seconds to join me." There was a pause. "Come, my fine fellow," continued the captain, Don't hang so long in the stays. I'm risking my life and the lives of these good gentlemen every second." There was a sudden scuffle, a sound of blows, and out burst Abraham Gray with a knife cut on his side of his cheek, and came running to the captain like a dog to a whistle. "I'm with you, sir," said he. At the next moment he and the captain had dropped aboard with us, and we had shoved off and given way. We were clear out of the ship, but not yet ashore in our stockade. This is the end of chapter 16. So, part 4 is called the Palisade, which is a fort, usually with wooden walls stuck up, and essentially what you do is you cut logs, and you tend to have a little point on the top, and you stick one into the ground and the other end sticks up, and you just place them side by side and side by side and side by side and side by side, and maybe nail or peg or tie logs on the inside or boards on the inside to kind of hold it steady so that one doesn't give way without pushing all of the others. And this is a fairly rudimentary fort. It's fairly easy to make, but at the same time it gives more protection than nothing. So you have this stockade set up, or actually I guess this part is called the stockade, which is a small fort, and then the palisade is the wall around it. So this is the Stockade. And so there was this small fort there that was put in by whoever, probably pirates, just in case, they need to defend someplace. And, it's like, okay, we'll set this up and we can come back to it. And they said a few men can hold off a regiment. So, that's 100. Well, that's not quite 100 to 1. That's 20 to 1 odds. Because this is just a place where you can just sit and hide. And it has the advantage of it has a spring. Now, medieval sieges were always up to you stand around and you don't really fight and you just kind of wait for the other side to starve. And, if you're locked in a city, the food supplies can go fairly quick. The water supplies can go very quick. But this is a place that had its own water supply. So they could hold out as long as the food holds out. And for 30 days afterwards, because people take about a month to starve and about a week to die of thirst. So they have water there. They have clean water there. Because remember, the water back at the swamp is bad to drink. There's probably other good sources of water on the island, but this is one that's defensible. That's close by. So here they have the good supply of water, the food they bring in, the powder, and there's no way you're going to be climbing over this 6-foot wall, 7-foot wall with people sitting inside shooting at you. And they talked about loopholes. Now, loopholes back in the day were little holes like this in a wall where you can look out and stick a gun through and go, gotcha. Or even before that, arrows, because they were set up in medieval castles. It's like, okay, you had these slits and you had an archer standing behind the slit and he goes like this. And in order to shoot the archer behind the slit, you have to shoot a hole like this big at 30 yards. While the archer has to hit somebody person-sized at the same distance. And it's much easier to hit something big than it is to hit something little. So it gave a huge advantage being able to shoot out. So they had this stockade and they pulled all of their stuff. Now, one of the things I don't know if you noticed was at the beginning they said this chapter is narrated by the doctor. The vocabulary changed. The doctor uses different words than Jim does, which is very rare to see. I mean, usually when I'm reading books, it's like, okay, this is from the perspective of character A, this is from the perspective of character B. But they all speak in the author's voice, so they all sound the same. But here you have the doctor. He's using bigger words, more eloquent. He has a different vocabulary. He's complaining about the smell of the tar. While Jim thinks that the smell of the tar is part of the smell of the sea and thinks that everything is wonderful. So you have this really sort of different flavor of the two people speaking. So this is something that you should look for in books. That when they switch characters, try and look and see how the characters speak and what that tells you about them. That's one of those things that's a sign of a good author, that the characters have much more of their own voice.